And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners, he eats with them." So he told them this parable. "Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and he rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost.' Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Or what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost.' Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
And so the anthem says, "Gather the people to hear what the Lord might say." And nothing could be a better introduction to the Old Testament this morning. In our reading in the Old Testament, what we have is one of those wonderful exposés of what is called rabbinical dialogue between humanity and God. And it looks as if at the end, when it says the Lord changed his mind about the disaster he planned to bring on his people, that is what it says, but that ain't what it means. Because the wonderful thing that we get out of the Old Testament is the talk that goes on between God and humanity. And this wonderful case here is in the Exodus, and they've come out of the land of Egypt, and while Moses is up talking to God, the people down below say, "You know, I remember how we used to do things." And so Moses' brother Aaron, under the pressure of the people, they say he builds this golden calf, and all the people are dancing around it and they're worshiping. And the Lord says to Moses, "Go down at once." Look at the exclamation mark after go down at once. Quick, quick, quick. "Your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, would act perversely," etc., etc., etc. "And they've forgotten everything I commanded them to do. They've made an image of a calf. They've worshipped it. These are your gods, they say, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now let me go," says God. "Let me at them, so that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and of you I will make a great nation." And this is where Moses says, does he really mean it? Does he? But Moses implored the Lord God and said, "Oh Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against," notice this, "your people?" Kind of sneaky, because God says to Moses, "your people." Now Moses is smart enough to flip the whole thing over. Wonderful, wonderful rabbinical dialogue going on here. He said, "Your people, who, by the way, not me, you brought them out of Egypt with great power and mighty hand. And oh, by the way," let's appeal to God's humanity a little bit here. "Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains?" Did you ever think of that one, Don? Huh? No, you didn't, did you? "Well, let me remind you," says Moses. And now, by the way, let's dig deeper back into the history of your people, Abraham, Isaac, Israel, your servants. How, by the way, you swore to them by your own self, not by me, by you. You did it. "I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven." And then the Lord changed his mind about the disaster he had planned to bring on his people. And all the time, God certainly knew what Moses was up to. So is this a fact that God is changing his mind? Or is this the great test of faith that God is giving to Moses? Go ahead, talk me out of it. Let's see how you do this. Let's see how the human mind works. Let's see if you remember that I promised you that I would take you out of this land and you would follow me. So even though it ends with the Lord changing his mind, he never changed it in the first place. He decided to have a faith talk with Moses to see if he really would go back to the essential. And the essential was God keeps his promises. And that's further explained in 1 Timothy when we talk about Saul, later St. Paul, who was one of the chief prosecutors of early Christians. You can see it in the book of Acts when the first martyr, Stephen, is stoned to death, and Saul is standing on the side, and he approves of this. He approves of it. But there is this spectacular conversion, and you'll remember the whole story of Paul being on the horse down on the ground, and he says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm Jesus, who you are persecuting." And from that point on, the whole idea of the body of Christ becomes a reality. It isn't just Christ who is persecuted, it is those people who follow. Quick, over to the gospel. And it's good. You might question this. If you had a flock of 100 sheep, would you leave 99 of them out in the wilderness alone to go after the one lost one? Kind of dubious, isn't it? But it says, which one of you having 100 sheep? Now, that means you own them, which means you, as a singular person, cannot tend 100 sheep. So you hire people, you hire shepherds, and one gets lost, and all of a sudden, the magic number of 100 is reduced by 1. It doesn't seem like much, except he knows, Jesus, that they will go and look. Now, when a sheep is lost during this time, it's a big deal, because 9 times out of 10, that sheep is going to die. It will die, because there are wolves up there. Remember the story about Jesus being the good shepherd. He says, "I protect you from the wolves that want to kill and steal and destroy." So this is nothing new to them. I never knew what a flock of sheep would look like until I was in the Friars and I was in England. And a friend of mine, he and I took a car and drove up into the Midlands. A rather scary, precarious journey because neither one of us had ever driven on the other side of the road. The natural tendency is kind of weave over here. Don't do that. It's very, very unusual. And so we went to Stratford-on-Avon and we saw Shakespeare's house. And it was like idyllic, and it was like River Avon, and there were weeping willows, and it was in the month of May, and the swans were nesting, and so they looked so beautiful floating around, and I decided to come closer to the river. And you don't do that, because the male swan is waiting for you. And once he sees a human approaching, maybe closer to the net, out he comes hissing with the longest neck you've ever seen. As you look behind him, and he's about 1 foot away from his beak getting you on the leg. By the way, that wing is so strong it can break a person's leg when it gets right away. So I got away with murder. But we came, as we moved to a field where there were sheep. And all of a sudden I saw what it was like to have to tend those sheep. And they have, of course, the dogs that shepherd them, move them around, and it was the most peaceful, idyllic thing I've ever seen, and it conjured up anything I ever heard from the Gospels, which was like a deja vu. I'm here. And so the thought of them wandering away, I thought would be important, because that's how you come to love those you tend. And so it's also possible that in this text, among the wolves also are the nettles. And the nettles are those things that the crown of thorns was made out of. And woolly sheep, if they get involved in those nettles, almost impossible for them to free themselves. So to find that sheep in those nettles with the possibility of wolves and to save it and to bring it back is incredibly important. So the real question here is, okay, I like this idea, and there's rejoicing over one sinner who repents over 99 that doesn't need it. And there even, I think in our ELW worship book, there is a hymn called Chief of Sinners Though I Be. I understand my own brokenness, but I can't bring myself to say, I'm the chief of sinners. Do you do that? Do you ever look in the mirror and say, out of all the world, of all the people ever born, I am the biggest sinner ever? I doubt if you do. Most people don't. So this whole idea of saving that one sinner is incredibly important, but how do we translate that into everyday talk of how we see the world and what's going on around us. And something rather interesting happened in Wednesday's Bible class, because we were looking at this text and saying, what is it like for a person to be saved? And the discussion went into incarceration. And we are talking about the changes in incarceration, how you recall, I think, 20, 25 years ago, 3 strikes you're out. Means if you had like marijuana for the 3rd time, you were in jail for 20, 25, 30 years. And as time went on, something happened. And that is, lo and behold, states started saying, oh, we don't care. I don't care what people say. Weed can be good for you. And even in some cases, it is good for you. I saw on television, did you see this young girl who's 10 years old who has seizures, 30 of them a day, her body is racked. And they discovered that there is a distillation from marijuana that when taken, put those 30 seizures down to 3 a day. It literally brought her back to life. So people began to say, well, what about all of that? Now, how many of you belong to AARP? You're old enough, don't give me that jazz, you don't get it. There is an article in their publication that came the other day, all about marijuana, and it talked about how it can relieve pain, how it is good for seizures, and of course it's a distillation. And there's this one woman who suffered from so much pain all her life. She's 78 years old, and she started taking small puffs of marijuana. And I say this because I was always brought up that this is terrible. I can remember as a kid on television, the government putting out anti-marijuana stuff, and it showed these people who became wide-eyed zombies. It was, a big government push. Anyway, this 78-year-old woman finally found that she could reduce her pain by close to 60%. And she called her son and said, well, your mother's become a doper. And he said, what on earth do you mean? And so he explained it to her. But he was more or less knowledgeable of this. So back to incarceration, and one of the things we talked about is that famous line when people are released from jail from incarceration. And what's the famous line? They have paid their debt to society. You've all heard that, haven't you? Yes. Shaking hands, yes, okay. But they haven't. Because that's going to be on their record for the rest of their lives. So yeah, you paid your debt, but just to remind you about all of that, what is it like? It's like being in the nettles of the briars, and the wolves are still out there. Well-being wolves, by the way, who want to give you a job, but the minute they see at the bottom of that page that you were a convicted felon, you shy away. You don't want to take that chance, do you? So out in the world, how does this text become real? In that Bible study this Wednesday, all of a sudden we began to put 2 and 2 together about something that was real out there. There is incarceration, and many times it is unjust. And now we're trying to pull that apart, and there is a new bill out there that looks at each one of these things and says, look, as this 78-year-old woman is puffing on marijuana for pain, and all of these people are in for 30 years for selling marijuana, where is justice really? So do we need to have another conversation about what we do about all of this? Because what once was seen as terrible evil, all of a sudden, it changed its mind. Remember that? He changed his mind. And every once in a while, we have to be called to change our mind. Do it cautiously, look at the studies that are going on, and then say to yourself, how does this affect other people? And in this case, in incarceration, we find people torn away for something that is now more and more accepted. Indeed, there is not one state that doesn't at least say you can have it for medicinal purposes. And there are other states, my Massachusetts, who says, go ahead, do what you want. Now, I'm not sure what's going to happen with all of this. I have a feeling that it's a two-edged sword. You're still going to have people who will abuse, But we still sell liquor and people abuse it. We still give people licenses and they abuse it. All kinds of abuses going on, and so all of a sudden we say to ourselves, what is it that God makes and throws out in front of us that is not so much a problem in itself, but the problem lies with us, in what we do and what we say with it. And so it is in this. There is more rejoicing in God and in heaven over one sinner who repents over the 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. And that type of repentance comes in all kinds of forms, doesn't it? But the real problem sometimes is, even when that person repents, there's going to be a bunch of people who say, we don't believe you. And what's more, we will keep you incarcerated in your own mind and in ours too, because we're not about to change our mind what you did, no matter how much you paid your debt to society. You see, this text cannot sit there in the Bible, and we call it the Holy Bible, and say, oh, isn't that interesting? If we don't translate it into the actual lives, then it's meaningless. Now, I'm not saying that what we came up with in the scripture class is the be-all and the end-all, but a conversation has to be started, because sometimes those conversations are revolutionary and they change the world. If you don't think so, see if you go down in Richmond, and if there's a public drinking fountain that says whites only, because there was, until somebody said, we have to do something about this. We have to be the people who speak over and against this type of thing. We have to be the person who rejoices when the sheep comes back, welcomes him back into the flock, and says, you are one with us once again. No easy task, and it calls for an awful lot of deep thinking. I know that. But without that type of thinking under the Gospel's mandate that you love one another, that change, only then things really, really change. So, this coming of this week in the news and on TV and papers and so on, every time you read an article, ask yourself, is this a moment of change, or does it call for me to think a little deeper than I used to think? And maybe there is in that moment the discovery